The Chobe River floodplains, stretching along the border between Botswana and Namibia, are well known for their remarkable ecological richness. It represents one of Africa's most dynamic wetland ecosystems. Large herds of elephant, buffalo, and antelope move across the plains. While a wide variety of birds gather here to breed and feed. Along the riverbanks, hippos and crocodiles dominate the waters and its edges, shaping the rhythm of life in and around the river. Rising above this dynamic floodplains, the rocky slopes are scattered with ancient, strange-looking baobab trees. Their thick, swollen trunks and contorted branches giving them an almost otherworldly presence against the sky. With the exceptional high rainfall in the Angolan Highlands recently, these floodplains were transformed into something closer to an inland sea than a river. During my recent visit along its banks, the water stood at one of its highest levels in years, widely reported locally as the highest in 15 years. The familiar floodplains had vanished beneath a deep, dark expanse, and with them, the predictable rhythm of life along a river were temporarily erased or changed. What made the experience particularly striking was the rare phenomenon of a river that appeared to flow in two directions. The Chobe River is hydrologically linked to the much larger Zambezi River. When the Zambezi is in high flood, its elevated water level can push back into the Chobe, reversing its flow upstream. At the same time, local drainage and residual downstream movement can persist, creating the unusual impression of opposing currents within the same system. It is not a permanent reversal, but a temporary equilibrium driven by flood pulse dynamics across connected basins. At a distance, the water presented as a dense, almost ink-like blue, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Yet, at the edge where it lapped against submerged grasses and tree trunks, it revealed itself as remarkably clear. The ecological consequences were immediate and at times severe. Islands formed where none usually exist, isolating both wildlife and people. Some human settlements required evacuation, and some lodges had to close as access roads disappeared beneath the rising water. On one such island, a herd of zebra remained stranded for days. A couple attempted to cross to the mainland, but sadly did not make it. These striped ungulates can swim, but their relatively heavy forequarters and lack of streamlined shape increased drag and energy use in water. The carcasses of the ones who did not make it inevitably would become sustenance for other inhabitants, particularly crocodiles. The rest of the zebra herd stayed behind, waiting. When I returned 7 days later, the water began to recede and flow had normalized. The island was empty. Whether they crossed successfully remained uncertain. Other animals were also affected. I observed a solitary female lechwe. She paced the water's edge, moving back and forth with visible agitation, her gaze fixed across the channel. Lechwe are adapted to floodplains, but even for them, this level of inundation appeared to disrupt social cohesion. She seemed cut off, temporarily separated from her group, caught between instinct and an impassable barrier. On another island, the pressure of the flooded floodplains also became more visible. More than 100 elephants had gathered on a shrinking patch of high ground. Along the narrow strip of an exposed shoreline, a dense bloat of hippos occupied what little remained of the beach, their bodies pressed together in the only available resting area between water and land. For crocodiles, the flood also presented complications. Under normal circumstances, they bask on exposed sandbanks or remain stationary in the water, waiting for the slightest misstep from unexpected prey. But the shifting currents reduced this and changed their behavior. Though small animals like birds, crabs, snails, and frogs also form part of their prey, it is not a regular sighting to see crocodile preying on dung beetles. Also preying on dung beetles and snails were water monitor lizards that were conspicuously abundant along the margins, capitalizing on displaced prey. Small animals forced from burrows or vegetation by rising water created feeding opportunities, and the monitors moved with deliberate efficiency along the shorelines. Hippos, typically reliant on a balance between water and adjacent grazing areas, were also affected. With much of the floodplain submerged, Access to short grazing routes was also reduced. Their distribution appeared more constrained, reflecting the altered landscape. The Chobe Floodplains are a premier destination for birdwatchers. Normally, the seasonal flooding creates a serene sanctuary, a perfect balance of protected islands, abundant food, and prime nesting grounds that attract a spectacular array of water birds. But the March-April 2026 flood was anything but normal. An unusually high flood swallowed the landscape, submerging much of the open plains and forcing an unprecedented mix of species into the remaining pockets of dry land. Stripped of their usual territories, birds of every shape and size were thrown together, competing for resources. It was an absolute feast for the senses, a chaotic, beautiful kaleidoscope of species, shapes, colors, and calls that turned a challenge for survival into a once in a lifetime wildlife spectacle. Towers of Giraffe stood out in sharp contrast to the sapphire blue waters. Though darkness in color is mostly age-related, some individuals here appeared noticeably lighter in coloration than those in regions like Kruger. Against the dark water, their pale coats created a striking visual separation, emphasizing their height. Botswana is unique in the sense that it is home to two different subspecies of giraffe, the southern giraffe and the Angolan giraffe. The Angolan giraffe are generally paler and their notched markings don't extend as far down the legs. This subspecies is found more to the west of Botswana. However, because wildlife movements aren't bound by park borders, northern Botswana represents a fascinating zone of proximity for these two distinct lineages. Among the giraffes, one encounter stood apart in both rarity and subtlety. A male and female engage in what can best be described as a quiet courtship ritual. They stood close, often hip to hip, their long necks intertwining in a slow, deliberate movement that resembled a kind of measured dance. Unlike the forceful necking seen between rival males, this interaction was controlled and almost restrained, with gentle twists and turns rather than heavy impacts. The interaction carried a rhythm, a sequence of approach, contact, and pause, suggesting a communicative process rather than competition. It was a behavior I had not observed before between a male and a female, and it revealed a more nuanced dimension of giraffe social and reproductive behavior that is seldom documented in the field. Another giraffe moment along the Chobe River was a more physiological one. The cyclical motion of regurgitation and rechewing characteristic of ruminants that allows them to break down tough plant material with efficiency. Seeing it so clearly, the rhythm of expansion and reduction in their cheeks made the process strikingly visible. Massive baobab trees provided a perfect dramatic backdrop for a spectacular herd of sable antelope, easily one of Africa's most striking and majestic sights. The sharp, striking contrast between their glossy jet black coats and snow white underbellies cut a magnificent silhouette against the golden riverfront grasses. Crowning their powerful frames were their iconic sweeping crescent-shaped horns, scimitar-like weapons that can grow up to 1.6 meters long and are formidable enough to deter lions. Seeing a large nursery herd thriving here is a rare privilege. Dominant bulls fiercely guard these groups, which consist of females and a joyful abundance of warm tan calves. Sable calves are born with this camouflaging light brown coat to hide from predators, only developing their rich contrasting adult colors as they mature. Watching them move as a collective on the slopes outside the floodplains felt like witnessing royalty of the African bush. Stepping away from the floodplains and onto the river slopes, the landscape shifts. Here, framed by ancient swollen trunks of giant baobab trees, I found myself surrounded by a large 100+ strong herd of buffalo, an unforgettable spine-tingling experience. Up close, these heavyweights of the African bush are mesmerizing, often called the Black Death for their notoriously unpredictable tempers and legendary memory that never forgets a grudge. They possess a collective power that demands absolute respect. Yet here, in a protected area, they were as calm as cattle. But what strikes you most in this specific terrain is their color, so different from Kruger or Bobvada. Here they sport a distinct, deep purple brick sheen. It's a literal paint job from the earth itself. By wallowing in the mud along the slopes, their coats become caked in alluvial clays, rich in iron and manganese oxides, minerals born from ancient volcanic basalt. As the mud dries under the African sun, the geology of Chobe quite literally stained the herd, transforming them into moving, breathing extensions of the very soil they walk upon. The Chobe riverfront, sometimes referred to as the elephant capital, is world famous for its elephant population, part of a larger continuous population of over 120,000. With the recent unusual high flood level, they responded differently. As the plains surrendered to the deep, in contrast to the tension seen in many other species, they appeared to embrace the abundance of water. Two young bulls lost themselves in play, their movements fluid and unrestrained. At times, they vanished completely, tumbling and rolling underwater, then rising in bursts of spray, their trunks sending playful fountains into the air. Other times, they sparred gently, lifting their tusks above the surface where bright white ivory met the dark sapphire blue, a striking contrast that lingers for a moment before they slip beneath again. watching them twist and glide, buoyed effortlessly by the deep waters. It is hard not to think of dolphins at play, their massive bodies now light, agile, and full of joy. In one quiet pause, one bull carefully lifted a plant from the water, holding it aloft with surprising delicacy, a small gesture that reveals the tenderness behind their size. Gentle giants, indeed. Until next time, may the wild always find a way to surprise you.